Mason Whitman will be handling the final presentations himself, Director Pemberton announced, his voice cutting through the conference room like a blade. He gestured toward the young woman sitting 2 chairs down from me. Angela will assist with any translation needs going forward. I watched Angela's face pale. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted the collar of her blouse. When the Al Rashid Holdings representative spoke his next question, she managed only 3 words before her voice faltered completely. The rest came out as fragmented English, missing every cultural marker that mattered. They didn't even have the decency to wait until we'd left the building. Daisy, Mason said, his tone flat and businesslike. We're restructuring your role effective immediately. HR has the paperwork ready downstairs. The translation device was still warm in my palm. Seconds earlier, I'd been navigating a delicate conversation about profit-sharing structures, the kind that required understanding not just vocabulary but the intricate dance of Gulf business customs. Now I sat frozen while 14 pairs of eyes, American and Saudi alike, locked onto me. 3 weeks ago, Mason had caught me after a midnight strategy session, his hand on my shoulder, his smile wide and promising. You're going to be standing right beside me when we sign this, Daisy. This deal will define Crestwood Industries for the next decade. I'd believed him. For 14 years, I'd believed that dedication meant something here. I was Crestwood Industries' Assistant Director of International Relations. That's what my business card said. But the title was a hollow shell compared to what I actually did. I was the bridge. The only person in this entire organization who could speak Arabic fluently enough to navigate the unspoken currents beneath every conversation. The only one who understood that a pause could mean disagreement, that certain phrases carried ancestral weight, that respect wasn't given in contracts but earned in gestures. Deals worth billions had hinged on single sentences I'd delivered. I'd worked through holidays, translated during family emergencies, sat in airport lounges at 3 a.m. to catch calls timed perfectly to Riyadh's business hours. I'd saved contracts that lawyers said were unsalvageable. I'd turned skeptical partners into long-term allies. My reward was being dismissed in front of our most valuable client. If you're new here and enjoying these powerful stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Let me know in the comments what part of today's story touched you most. Mason Whitman represented everything I'd spent 14 years building defenses against. Fresh from Wharton, armed with buzzwords and PowerPoint templates, he saw relationships as transactional obstacles. Where I saw cultural nuance, he saw inefficiency. Where I heard layered meaning, he heard words that needed to be simplified for speed. And now, surrounded by the people whose trust I'd spent over a decade earning, he'd decided I was expendable. The chairman of Al Rashid shifted in his seat. His eyes moved from Angela back to me, a question forming in the slight furrow of his brow. I held his gaze for a moment, then looked down at my hands. My pulse hammered against my ribs, but my expression remained composed. Silence, I'd learned long ago, could carry more power than protest. Right now, silence was the only tool I had left. I still remember walking into Crestwood Industries on my first day, clutching a worn leather portfolio that had belonged to my father. Inside was a dog-eared Arabic-English dictionary, a notebook with carefully practiced phrases, and a resume that barely filled 1 page. I was 23, fresh from a linguistics program, and desperately hoping no one would notice how terrified I was. My official title back then was Junior Administrative Assistant to the Middle East Operations Team. In practice, I made coffee, filed paperwork, and occasionally translated basic greetings when clients visited. The senior negotiators treated me like furniture, useful when needed, invisible otherwise. But I paid attention. I listened to every conversation, studied every interaction, memorized the names and preferences of every client who walked through our doors. I learned that Abdullah preferred his coffee with cardamom, that Khalid's eldest son was studying engineering in London, that certain negotiators bristled at direct questions but opened up when you asked about their hometowns. My breakthrough came in my 3rd year. We were in Dubai, sitting in a hotel conference room that smelled of leather and expensive cologne. The contract on the table was worth $300 million, and it was dying a slow death. Our lead negotiator, a man named Philip Crawford, had just used an English idiom that translated into Arabic as something deeply insulting about camels and intelligence. I saw the shift immediately. The client's jaw tightened. His senior advisor leaned back, arms crossed. We had maybe 30 seconds before they walked out. I didn't ask permission. I stood, smiled, and said in Arabic, "My colleague speaks from eagerness, not disrespect. In our tradition, we say a wise merchant knows when to listen before speaking. We are here to listen." It was a calculated risk. I'd used a proverb common in the client's home province, one that emphasized humility and wisdom. The room went quiet. Then the client's face softened. He uncrossed his arms, leaned forward, and replied, "A tongue that knows wisdom is worth more than gold that knows only weight." We signed the preliminary agreement 2 hours later. That story never made it into any company newsletter. My name didn't appear in the success memo. Philip took full credit during the quarterly review, standing at the front of the boardroom describing his innovative approach to cross-cultural negotiation. I sat in the back row silent, wondering if anyone in that room knew the deal had been seconds from collapse. It wasn't an isolated incident. Over the years, I became the person they called when negotiations stalled. I'd untangle mistranslations that threatened to derail shipping agreements. I'd rewrite contract clauses so they honored both American legal frameworks and Islamic finance principles. I'd sit through Ramadan nights, ensuring our calls landed at precisely the right moment in Mecca's time zone, never complaining, never asking for overtime. I saved a $40 million logistics contract once by catching a single mistranslated word in a customs document. The word in Arabic meant temporary storage. Someone had translated it as permanent seizure. If that document had been filed, our entire shipment would have been impounded. I fixed it in 10 minutes. No one ever knew it had been wrong. 14 years of this. 14 years of carrying Crestwood's reputation across continents, of being the invisible force that kept billion-dollar relationships intact. I'd built something I was proud of, not just the deals themselves, but the intricate web of trust I'd woven between two worlds. But pride, I was learning, has a bitter edge when it's not matched with recognition. Every success was absorbed into the company's brand. Every crisis I averted disappeared into someone else's performance review. My work was essential right up until the moment someone decided it wasn't. Mason Whitman arrived at Crestwood Industries in the fall of my 11th year. He came with fanfare, introduced at an all-hands meeting as the future of our international expansion. His resume gleamed with credentials. Top of his class at Wharton, consulting work for Fortune 100 companies, a TED Talk about disrupting traditional business models that had gotten 250,000 views. He wore suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He spoke in clipped, confident sentences designed to sound visionary. And from day one he made it clear that he viewed anything he couldn't measure as unnecessary baggage. Our first real collision came during a contract review for a joint venture in Kuwait. Mason had drafted the agreement using a template he'd pulled from a previous European deal. He'd barely glanced at the Arabic sections, trusting that the legal language would translate directly. It didn't. Buried in the financial terms was a clause that explicitly referenced interest-bearing loans, something strictly prohibited under Islamic banking law. The moment that contract landed on our client's desk, it would have been rejected outright, possibly ending the relationship entirely. I caught it by accident. I was leaving the office late, saw the draft sitting on the printer, and decided to skim it out of habit. When I saw the clause, my stomach dropped. I spent 2 hours that night rewriting the section, restructuring it to comply with Sharia-compliant financing standards, then resent it under Mason's name with a note explaining the changes. He never acknowledged it. The next morning he walked into the office, grabbed his coffee, and mentioned casually that the Kuwait deal was moving forward smoothly. He didn't ask how. He didn't thank me. I'm not sure he even realized I'd touched the document. A week later I overheard him in a meeting with senior leadership. The conference room door was cracked open and his voice carried into the hallway. "We're overcomplicating these deals," he was saying. "We've got people like Daisy who get bogged down in minutiae. Cultural sensitivity is fine, but it slows us down. What we need is efficiency. Streamlined processes. Clients don't care about hand-holding. They care about results." I stood outside that door, folder pressed against my chest, my pulse loud in my ears. Minutiae. Hand-holding. He'd just reduced 14 years of relationship building, of saving deals from collapse, of earning trust one careful word at a time, to unnecessary complications. I didn't confront him. There was no point. He wouldn't have listened, and challenging him publicly would only have made me look defensive. Instead, I filed the moment away, tucking it into a mental drawer alongside every other slight, every other dismissal. From that point on, every interaction with Mason felt like a chess match. He'd push for speed. I'd quietly ensure accuracy. He'd approve documents without reading them. I'd catch the errors before they became disasters. And through it all, he carried himself like the architect of our success, never noticing the foundation I was constantly shoring up beneath him. The tension simmered beneath the surface. We were professionals after all. But I could feel something coiling tighter inside me with every passing week, every casual dismissal, every moment where my expertise was treated as optional. Mason had no idea what he was standing on. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep holding it up. By the time the Al-Rashid deal reached its final stages, the numbers had become abstract. $5.3 billion. It was the kind of sum that stopped feeling real, spreading across infrastructure development, technology partnerships, and long-term supply chain commitments spanning 15 years. I'd been embedded in every phase. Not because my title required it, but because Al-Rashid Holdings had made it a condition of the agreement. Their security protocols were as much about respect as they were about verification. Every major milestone required voice authentication in Arabic from their designated primary liaison. Me. It wasn't just a formality. In their eyes, changing the liaison mid-process would signal instability, a lack of commitment. It would be like swapping the conductor halfway through a symphony. I took the responsibility seriously, perhaps more seriously than anyone at Crestwood realized. Weeks before the final signing, I'd commissioned a custom gift from an artisan in Riyadh, a hand-carved sandalwood box inlaid with geometric patterns traditional to the Al-Rashid family's home province. Inside, I'd placed a selection of rare ajwa dates wrapped in silk embroidered with gold thread. It wasn't just a gift. It was a signal. It said, "We understand your traditions. We honor your heritage." Alongside the gift, I'd written a speech entirely in Arabic. Not the sterile, literal translations Mason preferred, but something personal. I wove in regional proverbs, references to shared history, subtle affirmations of mutual respect. It was the kind of address that could make a chairman feel not just valued but seen. So I wasn't naive. I knew deals this size carried hidden tripwires. That's why, late one night while reviewing the master contract for the dozenth time, I found the clause buried in the legal appendix. Essential party continuity provision. It stated, in language so dry it almost disappeared into the page, that if the named primary liaison was removed or replaced before the final voice authentication sequence was complete, the agreement would automatically terminate. No renegotiation. No grace period. Just void. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood. Then I closed the document and said nothing. Not because I wanted the deal to fail, but because I'd learned something over 14 years. Power doesn't always come from making threats. Sometimes it comes from knowing exactly where the weight is distributed and who's standing on unstable ground. The next morning, during a prep meeting, Mason dismissed my proposed speech as too wordy and overly sentimental. He suggested I cut it down to 3 bullet points. I smiled, slid my notes back into my folder, and let him talk about efficiency metrics and streamlined presentations. I didn't argue. Inside, I felt the steady, sharpened calm that comes from holding information no one else at the table knows exists. I didn't plan to use it. But if they forced my hand, I wouldn't hesitate. Thursday started like every other negotiation day. Cold coffee beside a stack of annotated contracts. The low hum of the HVAC system in the executive boardroom. By mid-afternoon, the air felt different, though maybe that was just me sensing the shift before it happened. I sat in my usual chair as the Al-Rashid delegation settled in. Their lead negotiator, a man named Karim Al-Najjar, wore a tailored charcoal suit and a subtle smile. Beside Mason sat Angela, the junior translator he'd hired 3 weeks ago. She looked nervous, clutching the sandalwood box I'd spent weeks selecting. Mason cleared his throat. "Before we proceed with the final contract review, we'd like to make a small presentation." Angela stood. She opened the box, holding it awkwardly, and began reading from the speech I'd written. But within seconds the rhythm faltered. She mispronounced a critical verb, turning lasting partnership into temporary arrangement. Another slip made honored tradition sound like old-fashioned custom. I watched Karim's expression shift. Confusion first, then something closer to disappointment. When Angela presented the box, he accepted it with the polite smile reserved for strangers. He didn't open it. He didn't respond with the customary phrase that would signal mutual appreciation. The silence that followed was brief but suffocating. Then Mason turned to me. "Daisy, could you step outside for a moment?" I followed him into the hallway, past framed photos of past deals, moments I'd helped build now sealed behind glass. Helen from HR was waiting at the end of the corridor, a folder in her hands. "This is effective immediately," Mason said. His tone was clipped, professional. "We appreciate your contributions to Crestwood. HR will walk you through the details." No mention of 14 years. No acknowledgement of the role I'd played in getting us to this room. Just contributions as if I'd been an intern fetching coffee. When we returned to the boardroom so I could collect my things, every eye was on me. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing my hands shake. I walked to my chair, lifted my notebook and tablet and looked directly at Kareem. In Arabic, I said softly, "Your words today will carry weight beyond this room." He paused, studying my face. Then he replied, his voice measured, "And yours will be remembered." It was enough. I left the boardroom without looking back, the echo of our exchange following me down the marble corridor. The silence wasn't empty. It was weighted, purposeful. Every step carried more than my resignation. It carried the knowledge of what would happen next, even if no one else in that building had realized it yet. That night my apartment felt quieter than usual. I lived in a modest one-bedroom in a neighborhood where the streetlights flickered and the traffic noise never quite stopped. I sat on my couch, staring at the city lights blurring through the window, and let the silence settle around me like a blanket. I didn't call anyone. I didn't write angry emails or draft resignation letters. In moments like this, noise is the enemy. Somewhere in a secure server thousands of miles away, the system handling the Al-Rashid agreement was already processing my absence. Their voice authentication protocol didn't care about reasons or justifications. It only cared about continuity. My name had been coded into the agreement as primary liaison. That meant every step from initial discussions to final signature had been tied to my identity, my voice. When HR removed me from Crestwood's employee directory, it wasn't just a line on a spreadsheet disappearing. It was a trigger. At 9:23 p.m., my phone buzzed with an encrypted notification from the Al-Rashid system. The screen displayed one line. Primary liaison removed. Protocol 7 engaged. No explanations. No warnings. Just the cold precision of a rule being followed. Protocol 7 meant immediate suspension of all pending contract authorizations until a qualified, verified liaison replaced the removed party. And given the terms I'd read in that buried clause, the replacement process would take weeks if it could happen at all. I set the phone down on the coffee table. My expression didn't change, but I felt the weight of the moment settle deep in my chest. This wasn't revenge in the cinematic sense. No grand speeches or public confrontations. This was inevitability. A consequence written into the bones of the agreement they'd been so eager to rush. At 10:47 p.m., another notification arrived. This one wasn't from the system. It was a private message from a junior legal analyst at Al-Rashid, a young man named Faisal who I'd mentored during his first year. He'd once told me that watching me negotiate had taught him more than his entire graduate program. The message was 3 words: "Tomorrow will matter." I read it twice, then powered my phone off. I poured a glass of water, leaned back against the couch and watched the city lights flicker in the distance. Control isn't about forcing outcomes. It's about knowing which outcomes are already in motion and having the discipline to let them unfold without interference. In a few hours, people in corner offices would start to panic. Emergency meetings would be called. Words like irreversible would circulate. And I wouldn't need to say a single thing. By the time I finally went to bed, the apartment was completely dark. But I didn't feel the darkness pressing in. I felt, for the first time in weeks, like I could breathe. By the time most of Crestwood's staff were settling into their desks Friday morning, the damage was already spreading. I was in my kitchen, barefoot, watching sunlight stretch across the tile floor when the first alert hit my phone at 8:47 a.m. Al-Rashid Holdings withdraws from $5.3 billion agreement with Crestwood Industries, citing contract continuity breach. The language was diplomatic, phrases like unforeseen circumstances and procedural concerns. But the meaning was surgical. The market understood immediately. Within minutes, Crestwood's stock dropped 9%. Then 12%. By the time I refreshed the page again, it had slid past 16%. I sipped my coffee slowly. Outside, the world was loud with morning traffic and construction noise. Inside my apartment, everything was calm. At 9:15 a.m., the first financial news outlet published their breakdown. Someone, though I didn't have to wonder too hard about who, had leaked the section of the contract detailing the liaison removal clause. The article laid it out in plain language. Remove the designated liaison mid-process and the deal self-terminates. No appeals. No exceptions. The article spread like wildfire. Investors didn't appreciate learning that a company could miss something so fundamental, especially in a deal of this magnitude. Words like negligence and oversight started appearing in headlines. I imagined Mason's jaw tightening as he scrolled through his phone, the CEO's office erupting in frantic phone calls. Then came the video. It surfaced first on a small Arabic business forum, then leapt to social media within the hour. Someone from the Al Rashid side had filmed a portion of Thursday's meeting, specifically the moment when Angela, holding my sandalwood box, stumbled through the speech I'd written. The mistranslations were painfully clear to anyone fluent in Arabic. Lasting partnership became temporary arrangement. Honored tradition warped into old-fashioned custom. The video was ruthlessly captioned and shared, accompanied by laughing emojis and biting commentary. But beneath the humor was something heavier. A quiet confirmation to Al Rashid's peers across the Gulf that Crestwood had failed a basic test of cultural respect. By 10:30 a.m., the clip had been viewed over 800,000 times across the Middle East. The hashtags translated roughly to "Know Your Partners" and "Respect is earned, not bought." I leaned back in my chair, letting the steam from my coffee curl against my cheek. There was no gloating. No satisfaction in watching people scramble. This wasn't about revenge as spectacle. It was about precision. A consequence playing out exactly as it had been written, no more, no less. Somewhere across the city, voices were being raised, strategies rewritten mid-sentence, emergency meetings called. Here, in the quiet, I could feel the scale of it without needing to witness it firsthand. It wasn't joy. It wasn't vindictiveness. It was the steady satisfaction of knowing that truth has a way of surfacing when you stop holding it down. By late Friday morning, the headlines had shifted. It was no longer just about the Al Rashid deal. It was about leadership. The market wasn't just reacting to the contract withdrawal. It was demanding accountability. Crestwood's board of directors called an emergency session. Investors from 3 continents dialed in, their faces framed by the harsh glow of laptop screens. I wasn't in the room, but I'd sat through enough of these meetings over the years to picture it perfectly. The long table. The tight expressions. The wall of video feeds showing investors who'd woken up to watch their portfolios bleed. Reports reached me through former colleagues, people who still trusted me, who were horrified by what had happened. The CEO was pressed first. How could such a fundamental clause have been overlooked? Why had the designated liaison been removed at the critical stage? He fumbled through an answer about operational restructuring, efficiency improvements, modernizing processes. The words sounded hollow even secondhand. Then they turned to Mason. Why had he replaced the only fluent Arabic speaker in the company during a negotiation with an Arabic-speaking client? Why had he prioritized speed over relationship continuity? His response about streamlining and efficiency was met with silence. Then a question from one of our largest Middle Eastern investors. A man named Omar Al-Farsi, who I'd worked with personally on 3 separate deals. Do you even know who Al Rashid trusted in that room? The question hung in the air. Because the answer was obvious. It wasn't Mason. It had never been Mason. Several of the investors on that call had worked directly with me over the years. They remembered the midnight calls when shipments were stuck in customs. They remembered the careful translations that had prevented misunderstandings from becoming insults. To them, I wasn't just Crestwood's employee. I was the reason their investments had been safe. And now I was gone. Word reached me by early afternoon through a text from a former colleague. Whitman has been told to reach out to you. Not the CEO. Not HR. Him. I didn't answer the phone when it rang. I didn't return the first text or the second or the third. I let the silence do exactly what it was designed to do. A few hours later, someone I'd mentored years ago, A woman named Claire who now worked in contracts called me. Her voice was low, almost apologetic. Mason asked me for your personal number, she said. I gave it to him. I hope that's okay. I assured her it was fine. And it was. Because this was the part where you didn't need to move. You just waited for the other side to realize how few moves they had left. By evening, Crestwood's stock had dropped another 4%. The board was in closed-door discussions about leadership changes, potential lawsuits, damage control strategies. I didn't need to push. The weight of their own decisions was doing the work for me. Sometimes real power isn't in the strike. It's in standing perfectly still while the other side realizes the ground beneath them is already gone. The invitation arrived Monday morning, delivered by courier to my apartment. It was printed on thick cream-colored paper with Al Rashid Holdings' embossed logo at the top. There was nothing vague about it. No polite pretense of catching up. They wanted me at their New York office Tuesday at 11 a.m. I arrived 15 minutes early. Their Midtown headquarters was a study in understated power, all marble floors, brass fixtures, and the faint scent of oud drifting through the air. The receptionist greeted me in Arabic and I responded in kind, feeling at ease I hadn't felt since walking out of Crestwood. They led me into a corner conference room where Kareem Al-Najjar was waiting, flanked by two senior partners I'd worked with for years. We'd built trust over late-night calls, careful negotiations, and small gestures that had nothing to do with contracts but everything to do with respect. Daisy, Kareem began, his English warm and deliberate. We would like to offer you a position. Not as an employee of another company, but as our exclusive consultant for all United States operations. I folded my hands in my lap and listened as they outlined the terms. The retainer alone was nearly 3 times my annual salary at Crestwood. There would be a signing bonus deposited immediately upon agreement. More importantly, I would have complete discretion over how their U.S. engagements were handled. No middlemen. No executives streamlining my work. It wasn't just an offer. It was recognition, the kind that went far beyond numbers on a contract. Then Kareem leaned back, studying my face with quiet intensity. Do you know why we withdrew from Crestwood so quickly? He asked. I shook my head. We were testing them, he said. We wanted to see if they valued the person who carried the relationship or if they believed the relationship belonged to the company. When they removed you, they answered our question. The room went still. I felt something rise in my chest, not pride in their failure, but validation that the years I'd invested had been seen for what they truly were. I thought of Mason's dismissal in the boardroom, his talk of efficiency and streamlining, his complete inability to understand that trust isn't a line item on a budget sheet. I signed the agreement without hesitation. When we shook hands, Kareem switched to Arabic. It is good to work with someone who understands that words carry more than meaning. Leaving the building, the city felt different. Not louder or brighter but sharper, as if someone had adjusted the focus on a camera lens. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't carrying the weight of being undervalued. I was carrying the weight of being chosen. The Riyadh sun was high and unforgiving when my car pulled into the sweeping drive of Al Rashid Holdings headquarters 3 weeks later. The glass facade reflected the desert light in sharp golden angles. The building was designed to command attention and it succeeded. I stepped out, my heels clicking against polished stone, and for the first time in a very long while, I wasn't walking into someone else's empire. I was walking into my own future. Inside, the air was cool, scented faintly with cardamom and sandalwood. The lobby's marble floor mirrored intricate geometric patterns on the high ceiling, each line precise and intentional. I was greeted not as an accessory to a larger team, but as the person they had chosen by name, by history, by trust. An attendant guided me to the executive floor, where Kareem and the senior partners were waiting. We shook hands, exchanged greetings in Arabic, and settled into a discussion about the upcoming series of U.S. Middle East trade agreements. This time there were no interruptions. No one was streamlining my words or questioning the value of cultural nuance. My recommendations weren't just noted. They were implemented immediately. It was a quiet kind of victory, but it was entirely mine. Across the ocean, Crestwood Industries was learning the cost of arrogance. Word had reached me through the industry grapevine. The Gulf Trade Council had placed them on an informal blacklist, citing failure to maintain key liaison relationships as a risk factor. The fallout was swift and brutal. Contracts worth over $6 billion in projected revenue over the next 3 years vanished overnight. Competitors moved in within days, eager to fill the vacuum. And Mason? He was no longer VP of International Operations. The board had quietly reassigned him to a domestic planning role, an elegant way of saying he would never again be allowed near an international client. I imagined him sitting in a smaller office now, his window facing a parking garage instead of the skyline, wondering when exactly everything had shifted beneath him. I didn't need to gloat. The truth was, I barely thought about them anymore. Their world and mine had diverged completely, like two trains leaving the same station and heading in opposite directions. Later that afternoon, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows in Kareem's office, looking out over the city. From this height, the streets looked like fine threads woven into an endless tapestry. Each intersection a decision. Each road a possibility. It struck me how different the view looked when you were there by choice, not because someone had granted you permission to stand in the room. I felt it then. Not just relief but release. The kind that comes when you realize you're no longer carrying the weight of proving yourself to people who were never capable of seeing your worth. When I left the building that evening, the desert heat met me like an open hand, warm and encompassing. The driver opened the car door, but I paused, taking one last look at the building's gleaming facade. I hadn't just walked into Riyadh that day. I'd walked out of the shadow of 14 years spent building someone else's empire and into the light of building my own. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's living in a space they said you didn't deserve, doing the work they thought you couldn't, and never needing to look back. 6 months later, I stood in a different boardroom. This one belonged to Horizon Global Partners, a firm Al Rashid had just acquired a controlling stake in. The acquisition had been my idea, my negotiation, my success. I'd presented the proposal in 3 languages, navigated cultural concerns on both sides, and closed the deal in under 8 weeks. My name was on the contract. My signature was on the final page. The chairman of Horizon, an older gentleman named William Ashford, shook my hand after the signing. "I've been in this business for 30 years, he said. "I've never seen someone navigate complexity with such precision." I smiled, thanked him, and meant it. Later that night, back in my hotel room overlooking the Dubai Marina, I opened my laptop and saw an email notification. It was from Claire, my former colleague at Crestwood. Subject: thought you'd want to know. Daisy. Crestwood just announced they're closing the International Operations Division entirely. Mason left last week. No one's sure where he went. The CEO resigned under pressure from the board. It's a mess. Meanwhile, I keep hearing your name everywhere. People talk about you like you're a legend. Thought you'd appreciate knowing. Hope you're well, Claire. I read the email twice, then closed the laptop. Outside, the city glittered against the dark water, 1,000 lights reflecting endlessly. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindication. I felt something quieter, steadier. I felt free. Because the truth is, revenge isn't about destruction. It's about liberation. It's about walking away from the people who couldn't see your value and into the arms of those who could. I'd spent 14 years building bridges for people who thought bridges were disposable. Now I was building them for people who understood that bridges are how empires rise. And that, I realized, was worth more than any apology Crestwood could ever offer. If Daisy's story resonated with you, tell me in the comments what part struck you the most. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss the next story of justice served in the most unexpected ways.